There are megalithic structures in different, not all over the Earth, but in many parts of the Earth that are explained away as having been made by civilizations that could not possibly have made them. For example, the Inca in the Cusco area of Peru, or the dynastic Egyptians in Egypt. Both of those were more or less Bronze Age cultures, and yet they're attributed with being able to shape super hard stone with such primitive tools. So that's what my book Aftershock was about, because all we have remaining, seemingly, are the stone structures. We don't have the bodies of the people, other artifacts, and so that's all we have to look at. And clearly, each one of them has been damaged by something. That's normally said an invading army came in and decided to pilfer the buildings and things, but as you'll see as the slideshow progresses, we're looking at cataclysmic damage. And as the time frame that Neil said, this seems to have happened about 12,000 years ago. So if you look at this picture, this is the famous Machu Picchu in, outside of Cusco, Peru. And you see the two different types of building design. You see the loosely fit stones on top, and then you see the really big blocks, polygonal, underneath that. And some people would say, well, the Inca just wanted to build a strong foundation, so that's why they did that. But unfortunately, the stones fit so tightly together, you can't fit a human. And this is granite, so the Inca could not shape granite to this level. So what they clearly found was an abandoned site, and they decided to build around a megalithic core. So this is an example. Most of Machu Picchu has never been rebuilt in modern times. So it's like a time capsule left by the Inca. And in this picture, you see the really rough work on top. That's the work of the Inca on top of a megalithic wall. And the big gaps that you see are because this structure was hit by an earthquake of something like 9 to 10 magnitude. And that's why the stones on the bottom are separated. They were pulled apart east to west by a cataclysmic quake. And so we have the flood myth, not only in the Bible, but more than 200 indigenous groups from around the world have a story that in ancient times, the world as they understood it was destroyed. It could have just been their village, or it could have been a much larger area. It depends on the group you're talking about. But you have this global myth about a cataclysmic flood. And what we now know is that this cataclysm happened about 12,000 years ago, and it came from outside of our solar system. And I'll get into detail about that later. But it's something that was so massive that it altered the course of human history, and in fact, wiped out most of human history. So we have the story from Plato of a place called Atlantis. It's a story that he inherited from an older Greek, Solon, who actually learned it from the Egyptians. So the Egyptians had the knowledge of an ancient land somewhere scientific than philosophical. So I'll show you the evidence of probably what happened to, quote unquote, Atlantis. At the same time, about 12,000 years ago, there was a sudden massive die-off of what are called megafauna, like the woolly mammoth you see here. All of a sudden, you had this massive extinction, and no one can properly explain in general how this happened, but it has been found that woolly mammoth have been found in Siberia as if they were flash frozen. So this could mean that the impact or cataclysm that happened actually altered the axis of the Earth. It was probably originally vertical, because in a perfect universe, that's what you would expect. And then the cataclysm knocked the planet by 23 degrees. And so the mammoths went from a temperate climate all of a sudden to the Arctic, where they flash froze or froze very quickly. So this is what our planet looks like. As you can see, it has a 23.5-degree tilt, and that doesn't make sense in terms of how the universe would have been created. Everything should be perfectly vertical. You also have one of our other planets is rotating backwards, and another one is rotating on its side, as if something came from outside the solar system and devastated some of the planets. Also, the asteroid belt was likely originally a planet that got blown to pieces and now is a belt of rocks. So the megafauna, according to standard academia, were wiped out by Native Americans crossing the Bering Land Bridge. They honestly believe that these animals were so stupid that they didn't know what a human being was, and so these native people could simply walk up to them and stick an arrow in their heart and kill them off. But that's quite illogical. It's more likely that this cataclysmic shift moved them from one clan to another. Their food supply probably would have died out quite rapidly, and then other plants would have. So in the 1950s, a couple called Allen and Dallaire came up with the theory that a comet entered our solar system and either hit the planet, our planet, or came close to it, destabilizing it. And they theorized 11,500 years ago that this happened. And also Rand Ath, who's another author, he wrote a book called When the Sky Fell, and that's an indigenous tradition that all of a sudden the constellations moved. And that would be explained if the planet suddenly shifted from being vertical to being off by 23.5 degrees. And so following up on that was Barbara Hand-Clow. She took the study deeper. She consulted with her grandfather, who was a Cherokee, who talked about an ancient time when there were only 2 seasons on the planet, which makes sense if the planet was vertical. She's also an expert in astrology, and she believes that this cataclysm was so devastating and wiped out such a was going to return. And then you have Dr. Paul Laviolette, who's an American physicist, and he believes that the center of our galaxy is not a black hole, but it is a pulsar. And so what it does is every 13,000 years, it emits energy, deadly radiation in some cases, that could have crossed along the through our galaxy and then entered our solar system, and it could have caused all sorts of catastrophic damage, including going through the sun and pulling plasma with it to strike certain parts of the Earth. And also Dr. Robert Schoch, who believes that solar eruptions from the sun are a cycle of every 13,000 years, and Paul Laviolette also backs that up, that this event happens every 13,000 years. And so certain parts of the planet were struck by plasma. This also caused the melting of portions of the ice caps, and that ended the ice age. His estimate is within 2 weeks this happened. So the oceans of the world rose by more than 300 feet, according to his, or 2 weeks, and that would have, that change from ice to water would have created a lot of pressure on the crust of the planet, creating earthquakes, turning on dormant volcanoes, darkening the sky, making it as though the sun had almost disappeared, changing the climate, killing off the megafauna, etc. So all of these authors are talking about 11,500 to 11,700 years ago. And so that's why I wrote my book. I think all of them are correct to one extent or another. So legendary Atlantis, somewhere supposedly in the Atlantic, but it wasn't located in the center of the Atlantic because the depth there is several thousand feet. So it is possible that Atlantis or its aspects could have been in the Azore Islands, also in the Caribbean area, and quite possibly a portion of Antarctica, because Antarctica now is completely covered in ice, But if you tilt the planet by 23.5 degrees, part of that would have been temperate. And I think that's why there's so much scientific activity in Antarctica. It's not that they're counting penguins and measuring how deep the ice is and how much pollution is there. I think they found ancient lost technology, and that's why there are so many bases there and recent discoveries. So you also had what was called Lemuria or Mu in the Pacific. I honestly believe that Mu or Lemuria was Hawaii, because if you lower the water level of the oceans by 300 feet, almost all of the Hawaiian Islands are interconnected. And so that would create quite a large landmass. And the US Navy does not like people diving very deep off Hawaii, because I honestly think there are structures underwater that they're hiding. And you may also know of the site called Yonaguni off Japan, which 12,000 years ago would have been above water, and also in the Indian Ocean, south of India. Structures were seen during the event of the Great Tsunami. Buildings suddenly appeared out of the water and then disappeared again after the tsunami crossed. So we have these structures located in different parts of the world where the tightness of the fit of the stone is beyond our present capability. This wall is in Cusco. It's 38 inches thick, and you can't fit a human hair in the joinery. So the Inca civilization could not have built that. Other structures too, there are many of them where you see Inca work done. This is called the Temple of Viracocha, about 3 hours drive outside of Cusco. And you see it's adobe mud on top of a stone foundation. So what you have here is you have the Inca finding the ruins of a megalithic structure and building adobe on top of it. Because here we have the original lower part of the wall. It's basalt, which is very hard stone. Each stone is a shape and size, and they interlock almost perfectly. And another site located an hour outside of Cusco. This is called the Inti Punku, or the Temple of the Sun. And you see the rough stone work of basically broken rocks cemented together with a clay where the lady has her hand on. That is Inca construction. But then you see the wall on the left-hand side, and that is tight-fitting basalt blocks. So the Inca found the ruins of a site, and they simply built around it. And that's what they did all over Cusco and the Sacred Valley of Peru. So here you have a classic example. This again is what's called the Coricancha. And on the right side is the original construction. On the lower left is where the Inca found some basalt blocks that had fallen down. They tried to fit them together, but they didn't have the technology to make them fit well, but it functioned as a wall. Then above that, they ran out of stone, so they had to find other stone, which is andesite. So they glued those together with clay, and then the white up is actually Spanish construction. And this is the first topographical map ever made of Cusco in the 1500s by the Spanish. And you see there are thick walls and there are thin walls. So what this tells us is that the thin walls are the Inca work. Inca walls tend to be maybe 1.5 feet thick, whereas the megalithic ones, and you see the damage to them all, they're 3 to 6 feet thick. So the Inca found Cusco abandoned, and then they reconstructed the city with their limited capability. We also find polygonal construction. Every stone is a different shape and size, and originally these stones fit together so that you couldn't fit hair in between the stones. The quarry for this one's about 3 miles away. And some of the stones weigh up to possibly 10 tons, which would take 150 people to move. Then this is the giveaway, because on the upper area, see, they tried to put some of the stones back in place, kind of sloppily, and then they filled in the missing space with andesite and mortar. And then above that, they found stone from another damaged building of basalt and put that on top of it. This is what the Inca could do. You see, the tightness of the fit in front is quite good, but in behind, it's almost like a pie shape going backwards. So they wanted their work to match the megalithic work as much as possible, but they didn't have the technology of the ancient mysterious builders. And here, this is Sacsayhuaman. The biggest stones here are 125 tons. And if you look to the top left, you see Inca reconstruction work with just odd-shaped stone. And then near the center on the right top, that is actually modern reconstruction. So no one is capable of rebuilding it the way it originally was. So it was obviously hit by some kind of cataclysm. So if you missed this, this is an Inca construction. It's about 1,000 feet above the valley. It's very impressive work by Bronze Age culture. But in the same location, we have this series of 6 stones, and they weigh 60 plus tons apiece. The quarry, if you look to the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a mountaintop. The quarry is on the top of that mountain. So how could the Inca have cut these blocks from the top of a mountain, moved them down the mountain, across the valley, up onto its present location, and then put them together with a seamless fit? Highly unlikely. And it's the important thing is to really look carefully at these sites when you're there, because if you have a standard guide, they will brainwash you with a bunch of real nonsense. But if we go to the left-hand side and around the corner, you see here, again, this was not reconstructed in recent times. It's like a time capsule from Inca times. And so you see the Inca built with rough stone on top of what they found. Then famous Machu Picchu, and that is the correct pronunciation. It's Picchu, not Pichu. And so what you're going to see is the Inca found an abandoned megalithic site and built their city around it. The original construction is 5 to 10%, or more like 5%. And then the Inca built this very big, beautiful complex, but around a megalithic core. Because here in this picture, you see on the right, very fine craftsmanship in granite, which you cannot cut with bronze. And then to the left, you find a bunch of rocks stacked on top of each other. And they're in such close proximity that it's obvious to the eye that something's wrong here. So the construction on the right is original. The construction on the left is Inca. And again, this picture, this has not been reconstructed. Machu Picchu was discovered in 1911, and very little work has been done on it since Inca times. So you see the rough work on top. That's Inca work on top of megalithic work below. And this is another giveaway. This is a 3-sided building. It never had a 4th side. It probably never had a roof. It rains like mad in Machu Picchu, so why these open-air constructions were made is unknown. But the right side has sunk into the ground by 2 feet, pulling the wall apart. So an American geologist was there with me, and she said this would be a 9-point-something earthquake. And if it did this to a megalithic structure, it would have basically blown Machu Picchu to pieces. And here at Sayhuite, you see the stone beautifully shaped, andesite, very hard stone. It's snapped in half like it's a piece of styrofoam. So that to me, again, is an example of cataclysmic activity. Then we move to Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, located 13,000 feet above sea level, south end of Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. And there are 2 kinds of stone here. There's a gray stone and there's a red stone. The red stone is sandstone found at a quarry about 9 miles away. Some of the stones still there weigh over 100 tons. So how was a Bronze Age culture like the Tiwanaku people moving 100-ton stones over mountains to build this site. And then the gray stone comes from this volcano, which is 45 miles away. And these are some of the gray stones, the famous H blocks you see in the background. There are 9 H blocks, and contrary to popular belief, each one is a different shape and size. So they were not made in molds, and they were not made in an assembly line. Each one has its own unique signature. And the archaeologists have dug down about 2 feet, and they found the shattered remains of structures underground. Some radar sonar mapping has been done at the site, and there are chambers underground, but the archaeologists refuse to dig because they say this site is no deeper than 2 feet and is no older than 2,000 years, constructed by yet another Bronze Age culture. So also in the nearby area, individual dug down to build the foundation of a building, and he discovered the shattered remains of human beings. So it's quite possible that Pumapunku and Tiwanaku were in a wall of mud that came from Lake Titicaca, the result of a cataclysm, and we covered the site. Pumapunku was more or less buried. Tiwanaku has structures a little higher, so they were exposed. The Tiwanaku culture did appear 2,000 years ago, but they simply recycled what they found. Pumapunku wasn't discovered until early in the 20th century when foreign archaeologists came and started to excavate. And the surfaces at Pumapunku are almost laser flat. So these are not things that can be achieved by a Bronze Age culture. There simply is no way. And the precision, we've had engineers there and tool and die makers, and they can kind of technology we have that could do this kind of work today, possibly a router and some kind of saw, but we find no tool marks, which is quite amazing. And that again is why people think that this is concrete, but it's not. Geologists have proven that it comes from the volcano 45 miles away. And also there are magnetic anomalies, especially with the H blocks. Depending where you put a compass on the H block surface, you'll get different readings. So the design of the H blocks and the magnetism are correlated, and that's my present study there, is to figure out why the magnetism, how did the magnetism work, etc. This is the large gate of the sun. You can see that it's been snapped in half in the distant past. The carving on the surface was never finished. You see the left-hand side at the top. The birdman, that carving was never completed. But that work was done by the Tiwanaku people on the flat surfaces they found, because there is no artwork at Pumapunku in the original state. The Tiwanaku culture were artistic. Whoever built Pumapunku were simply interested in function and form, not design and artsiness of any nature. This is how it was found in the 16th century. Again, you can see that it was snapped in half by something. And again, the archaeologists insist that these bronze tools were what were used both at Pumapunku, Tiwanaku, Cusco, Machu Picchu, the Giza Plateau in Egypt, etc. You can't cut hard stone with tools like this. It's completely futile. So speaking of Egypt, let's move to Egypt. On the right-hand side, you have a sarcophagus that was made during dynastic times. You see all the hieroglyphics carved on it. You see how rough it is. And it is granite from Aswan. Granite is 7 out of 10 on the Mohs hardness scale. So by bashing away at the stone and with a lot of care and attention, the dynastic Egyptians could make kind of a rough surface like this as a sarcophagus for somebody. The one on the right is listed as pre-dynastic, And so you see it's by far superior to the one on the right. Also in the Cairo Museum, there is a stone box that was never finished, and you see the saw mark in it. What happened was that whoever was operating the saw, the blade started coarse, and so it snapped the lid of the box off. And so what they simply did is they abandoned that project and went and started cutting something else out. So obviously the technology they had was so sophisticated that if they made a mistake, it's like, oh, well, who cares? Let's move and just cut another one. And this shows you that it was actually two circular saws cutting it. And the feed rate, which means the rate at which the saw was cutting, it was removing 2 millimeters of material per revolution, which is beyond 21st century technology. So whatever material the saw blade and cutter was made out of is beyond diamond. Also, other artifacts, they list this as being a lotus vase or lotus plate, but it looks more like a piece of a machine. Unfortunately, it was badly reconstructed in the 1930s, but the original component or aspects of it show incredible precision. So you see here, the left-hand side, part of that is original. It looks like some kind of impeller, but it didn't push or pull. It seemed to just rotate and vibrate. It's another project we're working on. There are also a number of vases, dishes, cylindrical jars, and vases with handles made of porphyry, basalt, diorite, and slate. The first three are very hard materials and would require diamond level technology in order to be able to cut. And they even list it, or list them, there are 30,000 of them, as being archaic period, which means pre-dynastic. So they're even admitting that these things are older than the pharaohs. But you see the level of precision. These had to have been turned on a high-speed lathe. And when they say they're pre-dynastic or archaic, that means that these were made before the invention of the potter's wheel. And a lathe is a far more complex machine than a potter's wheel is. So this is where they start to slip up in their own accounting. Here you have another one of the 30 or possibly 40,000 vessels. You can tell by the lip and the groove, this was made on a lathe. So you had to have at least diamond tools and some kind of very powerful motor running at thousands of RPM in order to create a shape like this. We also find drill holes. Again, this is in granite, and you would have to have at least diamond level technology to be able to drill these holes. And there are hundreds of these. Then we have the Great Pyramid itself. 2.3 million blocks of limestone, each weighing tons. The conventional account is that this was constructed in 25 years during the time of Khufu. And what that would mean, if you actually ask an engineer, not an archaeologist, but an engineer, how long would it take to build this? Or not how long. If it took 25 years, how fast would you have to cut, move, and fit into place each one of these multi-ton blocks? The answer is 1 every 2 minutes. Impossible, even today. And if you didn't know, the Great Pyramid is 8-sided. It's not 4-sided. You see the indentation in the center on each side. That further complicates the construction process. And we have a photo here of what's left of the casing stone. They fit together perfectly together. You can't fit a human hair in between. The quarry for this, the casing stone, is on the other side of Cairo, many miles away. And I think what happened is, again, a cataclysmic event that shook the skin off of the surface of the Great Pyramid. And that's why excuse me, that maybe the dynastic people and others that came later, they harvested the stone on the ground. They didn't actually pull the casing stone off. They just found it lying, and so they used that to build Cairo out of. And also the Great Pyramid was locked into the bedrock. It doesn't sit on top of it, it locks into it. So three-dimensionally, and that's interesting because we do think that the Great Pyramid was a resonant structure of some kind. It created or produced some kind of energy, and that's why it had to be locked into the surface, because it connects also with a whole series of tunnels and shafts. So this is the opening to a little shaft. There are many of these all over the Giza Plateau. The biggest ones are quote unquote off limits. But if you get the right guide, which we have, you can go and see some of the bigger shafts. And here's a big shaft. You can see this is at least 20 feet by 20 feet. It's cut into the bedrock. At present, it goes down about 50 feet. But if you account for possibly 12,000 years of sand blowing around this area, this could be several hundred feet deep. And there's no way that the dynastic Egyptians did that. We also find machine marks in different locations. This is near the Great Pyramid. It's a saw, and if you look at the horizontal lines, this saw was cutting into the basalt at a rate of 2 millimeters per revolution, or per saw mark going back and forth. That's beyond 21st century technology. And inside the Great Pyramid, we believe, again, that it was a resonant structure of some kind. This is the Grand Gallery. The acoustics are quite good. The acoustics are astonishing in the King's Chamber, especially. And it's tuned to ohm and other octaves of ohm. So it's tuned to 432 hertz, I believe. Also, if the Great Pyramids were resonant structures emitting sound or some kind of vibratory energy, it's likely that the obelisks were the receptors, like an ancient type of Wi-Fi. The carving on the surface was done by the dynastic Egyptians, but they found the actual obelisks in the locations, especially at Karnak. They're lined up like a series of antennae. Then the Sphinx, we know how old the Sphinx is based on science. The blocks that you see here, some weighing up to maybe 40 tons, were cut from the area around the Sphinx. The Sphinx wasn't simply hacked out of the ground. It was made by removing these multi-ton blocks and building the Sphinx temple in front. And so when we look at weathering patterns, you see the heavy weathering on the chest of the Sphinx. And so most of the time throughout its history, it's been buried up to its neck in sand. Over time, they had to keep digging away to uncover it over and over again. So the face was recarved during dynastic times. And the weathering patterns are interesting because you see the horizontal weathering, that is wind and sand, but there's vertical weathering that could only be achieved by water, and you're talking a lot of water. And climatologists and Dr. Robert Schock have figured out that the last time it rained heavily on a sustainable basis in the Giza Plateau area was a minimum of 10,000 years ago. So the Sphinx is a minimum of 10,000 years old, which is twice as old as the dynastic Egyptians. They found the Sphinx, they found the Great Pyramid Complex and other structures in Egypt and adopted them. Now here are the Sphinx paws. You can tell that it's been reconstructed many times. And the most curious thing is this wooden platform, because there is a center section here which can come out. And when I asked our guide, why is that? He said, because that's the entrance to the underground system of the Giza Plateau. So they have found what is called the Temple of Records underneath the paws of the Sphinx, but they built this platform over top of it so nobody can find out. but now we know. Then this is the bent pyramid called Seneferu. And when you translate Seneferu to its English equivalent, it means double harmony. So that could represent two tones or two frequencies, not the name of a pharaoh. You also see that the upper section, all the casing stone's gone. And the lower section, most of the casing stone is there. So the standard story is that came ripping the casing stone off in order to recycle it. But why wouldn't you start at the bottom and work your way up to the top? Why would it be at the top? Why is the stuff at the top missing? Probably because that angle was sensitive to the catastrophic earthquake and other dynamics that happened in this area 12,000 years ago. As well as next door, we find the red pyramid. And again, they'll say, well, people came and ripped all the casing stone off the red pyramid. But as you can see, there is no appreciable stone left. It's all sand. So it's quite possible that the damage to this pyramid was that basically the casing stone blew off the surface and was reduced to sand. In the interior of the red pyramid, it's all lined in granite. And again, it's tuned to ohm and octaves of ohm. So it obviously was a resonant structure because dead pharaohs don't need to hear sound. Then also at Saqqara, we have thousands upon thousands of pieces of other jars that had to have been made on lathes. So that increases the number of ancient pre-dynastic stone bowls and plates that were made by the so-called theoretically more primitive people to several thousand more. So you had a lot of machines at work creating all these bowls and plates and stuff. Then we have what's called the Serapeum of Saqqara. And this is an underground system of tunnels where we find massive boxes weighing 100 tons apiece. This, for example, is one of the boxes. If you go inside of it, it is actually tuned to ohm again. And the lid originally fit perfectly to the box, and the box and the lid were one piece of stone. The stone itself came from either the eastern desert of Egypt or Aswan, which is about 500 miles to the south. So how did they cut it? How did they move it? And there are, I think, 27 of these boxes. So here, this is Stephen Mailer, Egyptian or Egypt expert. You see the polish of the surface of the bottom of the lid. Again, these things fit together so tightly that it was like a hermetical seal, and they're off perfect flatness by maybe 2/10,000ths of an inch. The carving on the surface is dynastic. See, it's very rough. Trying to chip away at the surface. But the dead giveaway is the hieroglyphics are much cruder than the surface itself. So the Egyptians found the boxes and tried to carve inscriptions into them. This is the interior of one. And again, it's perfectly tuned. So that's another thing we're working on is what were these boxes for? Why are they tuned to specific frequencies? So this is the oldest depiction of an astrological calendar at Abydos in Egypt. It supposedly, I'm no astrologer, but it supposedly dates from the time of Cancer, which I believe is about 11,500 years ago. So astrology, according to some, began after the Great Cataclysm. Then we have the famous helicopter on the left and the tank on the right, and supposedly a submarine or something like that. It's a curiosity at Egypt, likely the only one of its kind. Is it depicting ancient machines? Is it a mistake? No one really knows. Also, we have the Osirion, huge blocks of granite. This was built underground. Again, they say it's a tomb, but it's likely more akin to something like a power station or an energetic structure of some kind. The stone again came from the eastern desert of Egypt or Aswan. You're barely or rarely ever allowed inside here, but it's one of the most fascinating of the ancient sites, quarried possibly during dynastic times. More drill holes. This is a huge one. It's a core drill, which means it's hollow. The wall of the drill is 2 to 3 millimeters, which is beyond 21st century technology. And there are lots of these at Karnak and a site called Abu Sir. So here you have the accuracy of this carving. Again, the dynastic Egyptians didn't have the tools to carve a polished surface like this, and the accuracy is almost like a CNC cutting machine programmed by a computer did the work, using sacred geometry too. Then we have the Colossi of Memnon. This pathway is 23.5 degrees off perfect east-west, and the surfaces look like they were burnt off. They weren't chopped off by some conquering army. It looks like the front surface of the statue literally blew off. You see the charring and discoloration of the stone. The backside's almost in perfect shape. And this giant sculpture weighed 1,000 tons. It's in perfect line with the Colossi of Memnon, and the back of it is all burnt. So it was originally looking into the Valley of the Kings, and something caused it to explode. And in the Valley of the Queens and Kings, massive chambers of limestone were found by the dynastic Egyptians and used as tombs, but they didn't cut them out because you can see the size of these things, and there are hundreds of them. So they were found by the dynastic Egyptians. As well as here, this is a secret location that we were allowed to go to. The caretaker said that this underground system goes underneath the distant mountain, connecting the Valley of Queens and Valley of Kings together with a series of tunnels cut into the bedrock. This large structure or thing at Elephantine Island, incredible precision. It looks like it was literally backwards, and I just completed a video that'll be up on my YouTube channel that shows you the evidence of catastrophic destruction at this site at Elephantine. Then we have a 1,200-ton obelisk whose construction suddenly stopped for no known reason. There's no way that the dynastic people were shaping this, but the curious thing is that whoever was trying to cut this out found that there was a horizontal crack as they cut down, and so this project was abandoned, and they simply moved on and started making other obelisks. So the technology was obviously super advanced, that they had the capability to say, oh, well, this is flawed, let's go make one somewhere else. And this is a smaller obelisk. This shows us the technology involved. It's almost like the stone was being shaved somehow or scooped out. Well, that's something that will be coming up on my YouTube channel within a week or two as well. It's a detailed examination of these strange cutting technology marks. Then we move to Baalbek in Lebanon. We have an 800-ton stone block that later the Romans tried to cut pieces out of, sometimes successful, sometimes not successful. But it was cut from the side of the wall and dropped down. So it shows the same cutting mark technology as we see in Egypt. So it could be whoever was working in Egypt was also working at Baalbek. This is the largest stone on the planet that has ever attempted to be cut. It weighs 1,200 to 1,500 tons. There is a crack in the bottom of it, and it seems literally like work stopped spontaneously, or all of a sudden the site was abandoned. And again, a possibility could be it was hit by a cataclysm, destroying anybody who lived in the area. This is another view of that 12 to 1,500 ton block. They've recently discovered there are bigger ones underneath it. These are 3 located a mile away at the actual site of Baalbek. So here in line you have what's called the Trilithon, which are 1,000 tons apiece. Above that you see very crude work done by the Romans later, of stuff they found just lying around. So that's what we tend to find. The lower work is superior and of a greater scale than the upper work. You find that in Peru, you find that in Bolivia, you find Egypt, you find it in Turkey, you find it in Italy, you find it in many different locations. And here again, this is at Baalbek. These are 800-ton blocks. So it seems like work suddenly stopped at Baalbek. And again, we find catastrophic damage. Then, recently, Petra in Jordan. This is the famous treasury that was featured in Indiana Jones. It's an astonishing piece of work. But this, most tourists go to this site and they come and visit the treasury, they have a look at it, and they go, okay, I'm satisfied, and they leave. But the treasury is less than 1% of the Petra site. It's 7 miles long. There are hundreds of these chambers here. We spent the entire day walking around. And the standard academics say that it was literally Arabs on camelback that came and built this. No, I'm presently working on a book about Petra. It's mind-boggling. You see, there are hundreds of these chambers. You can see this one is maybe 15 feet tall, 20 feet across, 20 feet deep, no ornamentation. Then we have all of these facades that are cut into the bedrock. We had our geologist Susan Moore with us, just from Canada. And she said this stone is 7 out of 10 in terms of hardness. So that means you would need to be beyond tempered steel to be able to do this work. And some of the basic shaping is very similar to what we find in pre-dynastic Egypt. So it's quite possible that Petra, Baalbek, and the ancient parts of Egypt were all constructed by the same beings. I think whoever built Petra was also responsible for the pre-dynastic Egyptian and Baalbek as well. Petra, Baalbek. There's stuff in the deserts of Saudi Arabia too that look like this. So it was either an advanced human civilization. The only one I can think of are the so-called Atlanteans, but you know, who knows if the Atlanteans ever existed or not? I'm open to the idea. But I have no idea. But if it wasn't them, then maybe it was someone from off planet. Yeah, very open to the idea. You're looking at technology beyond 21st century technology. But whoever did the work here did not do the work in Peru and Bolivia, because the work in Peru is organic. This is very linear, so the mindset's completely different. So also when you look at Pumapunku, it's a very different mental outlook. So I think there were at least 3 different advanced civilizations, maybe more, that existed all to 12,000 years ago. Whether their tools with them, or whether they're buried in the sand, or whether they're hiding in the museum, I don't know. But we're hoping to make inroads into all of this. There are so many of these chambers at Petra that they literally turned one of them into bathrooms. So this gives you a sense of how big Petra is. If you ever get a chance, spend at least an entire day there, because it's mind-blowing. This is one of the inner chambers. You see the tool marks, and you see that it's 80 feet by 80 feet by 30 feet. That's something like 300,000 cubic feet of material was removed. It wasn't done by the Arabic people of the area around 300 BC with a bunch of chisels. This is astonishing technology. There are also staircases that go on for miles, some repaired. You see the repair on the right. On the left, you see the original marks. And then we have, this is another one of these things at Petra. This is called the monastery. But you notice the difference, maybe, but if you had a chance, or do look at what's called the treasury. You'll see the treasury has a lot of fine art detail to it. I think this is the original look. So Europeans who supposedly made it, which they didn't, they were very wealthy Arab people, traders. So they probably hired some Greeks around 200 BC to do the fine detail work on the treasury, but they never got around to the other stuff because there's too much of it. It's huge. There's also another location I think I have here. Here, this is half an hour's drive away. This is called Little Petra, and it's not little, it's big. So there are these structures going from so-called Little Petra all the way to Big Petra, hiding in the caverns and stuff. So this covers hundreds of square miles. It's cool. I'm very happy I get to, for myself, discover places I've never been to, but the difference between seeing a photograph of something and visiting the location is completely night and day. Because if you have an open, keen mind, you'll be able to see a lot of stuff that the tour guides will never tell you because they have blindfolds on, literally. This is the way you get to Little Petra. It's the only opening, so it's almost like a fortified thing with only one way in, one way out. And again, you have these massive chambers, you have staircases cut into the sandstone bedrock. These are machine marks. There are 3 different tools used at Little Petra, but you see it's almost like a rake that was being operated here in order to do there's a roughing tool, a medium tool, and then on the right side, that's the finishing tool. And to me, it looks like it had to be mechanized in some way. Then, Jerusalem, lost ancient high technology. This is underneath Temple Mount. One stone, 11.5 feet by 41 feet. So this could very well tell us that even before the time of the Canaanites, somebody was living in Jerusalem. And Greece, you have lots of megalithic stuff in Greece. You see the amount of erosion. This is limestone, so it's reasonably soft, but you have a lot of stuff in Greece, including the base Parthenon is sitting on. The Parthenon was built, looks like it was cut with a machine. So there's a lot of stuff in Greece. You have the legends of the Titans. The Titans were probably either people or beings who were capable of utilizing lost ancient high technology for construction. That's why they were called the gods, because they weren't God, but they were godlike, awe-inspiring. You find the same tradition in Egypt and among the Inca of earlier civilizations who were godlike. Again, whether they were superhuman, whether they were from another planet, I don't know. Could be. Okay, so we have Easter Island. Robert Schoch believes that some of the structures on Easter Island are more than 12,000 years old, much older than the Polynesians. Polynesians have been there for 2,000 years. And the heads are not heads, the heads are complete bodies. There are more than 900 of them. You see here, excavating, they're digging down, finding that these are full bodies. The largest one, this guy Thor Heyerdahl in the 1950s. The Polynesians made some of them, but not something of this scale. It's too big. And then this is in literally my backyard in Cusco. You see megalithic work that I'm pointing to, and then rougher Inca work top. And that basically is it. I, of course, have tons more material, lots on my YouTube, 900 videos on my YouTube channel. So this is my book, one of 23. My basic book for the study of Peru and Bolivia is this one. And this is my book about the ancient work in Egypt. I'm working on my Petra one now. Machu Picchu. This is a virtual guide, so you don't have to hire a guide. It's actually made so you just flip the pages and walk through the site of Machu Picchu. With that, I thank you.